All right, so as the Joe Biden administration is facing mounting pressure over full-throatedly supporting and endorsing and funding and arming and giving diplomatic cover to Israel's massacre of innocent Palestinian men, women, and children in Gaza, they are beginning to get tougher and tougher questions. So I got a couple different clips here that stood out to me. First, we got John Kirby here, okay, and then we're going to get to this guy, John Feiner, who was on Meet the Press, where they are both asked somewhat decent questions here. One is about international law and whether or not Israel is following in accordance with that. And then this one is about the language of genocide that is currently being used by people to describe what is happening in Gaza. So let's just go ahead and jump into this John Kirby clip here, and then I'll break it down from there.
I said this the other day. Again, people can say what they want on the sidewalk, and we respect that. That's what the First Amendment's about. But this word genocide is getting thrown around in a pretty inappropriate way by lots of different folks. What Hamas wants, make no mistake about it, is genocide. They want to wipe Israel off the map. They've said so publicly, more than one occasion. In fact, just recently. And they've said that they're not going to stop. What happened on the 7th of October is going to happen again and again and again. And what happened on the 7th of October? Murder, slaughter of innocent people in their homes or at a music festival. That's genocidal intentions. Yes, there are too many civilian casualties in Gaza. Yes, the numbers are too high. Yes, too many families are grieving. And yes, we continue to urge the Israelis to be as careful and cautious as possible. That's not going to stop, from the president right on down. But Israel is not trying to wipe the Palestinian people off the map. Israel's not trying to wipe Gaza off the map. Israel's trying to defend itself against a genocidal terrorist threat. So if we're going to start using that word, fine, let's use it appropriately.
Okay, so there is just so much to say about this. First off, incredibly ironic for him to say that Israel is not trying to wipe Palestinians off the map. This is a settler colonial project, okay? They actively are conducting an ongoing slow-rolling ethnic cleansing that they have been for decades of the Palestinian people in the West Bank especially. We have seen a dramatic rise in settler violence that is backed up by the IDF as Israel continues to kick Palestinians off of their land and claim it for themselves. That is literally them trying to wipe Palestinians off the map. But it's even more ironic because, and I'm going to get to this here in a second after we watch the second clip that I have lined up here, Benjamin Netanyahu, back in September of this year, went in front of the United Nations and literally held up a map of what he called the new Middle East, and on that map, they literally erased Palestinians from the equation. It showed all of the surrounding countries of Egypt and Jordan and Iraq and Syria and Israel, but Israel was highlighted in blue, and it was covering the entirety of this region, as if Palestinians in Gaza and Palestinians in the West Bank simply didn't exist. Okay, so they have pretty much literally wiped Palestinians off the map, not just in the actions that they are taking on the ground of this ongoing ethnic cleansing, but also in a figurative way by holding up maps where Palestinians are wiped off of it. So in that sense, it's just like deeply ironic. Now, I want to touch on another thing real quick before we get to the second clip here. So when he uses the word genocide to describe Hamas, okay, I want to make something very clear. When I use the word genocide to describe what Israel is doing, I'm basing it off of basically three different things. Number one is their actions on the ground and what they are doing in flattening Gaza to the ground, bombing hospitals, bombing mosques, bombing schools, bombing UN shelters, bombing residential buildings to the point where now a majority of the residential housing in Gaza has been destroyed, of the forced displacement of, at this point, upwards of 1.8 million people in Gaza, okay, as they are continuing to ramp up their offensive into the south of Gaza, which is where they told people in the north to flee to. All of these different on-the-ground actions. That would be number one for me to use the word genocide. And I talked about this in a previous video, what the actual, under international law, under the Geneva Conventions, what genocide actually means. That fits under that definition. Number two would be their rhetoric that they are using. And I'm going to give you guys a whole host of different examples of the genocidal rhetoric that we have heard from Israeli politicians and pundits here in a minute. So that would be number two. So we have the actions on the ground, number one, the rhetoric that they are using, number two, and number three would be their capacity to actually carry out a genocide or a full-blown ethnic cleansing. Now, I think it's totally fair to say that there are probably a bunch of Hamas members who do want to wipe all of Israelis off the map, that they would, if they had the chance, kill as many Israelis as they possibly could get their hands on. But Hamas, okay, is not the same in terms of the power, in terms of their ability to conduct violence at that scale as Israel. Hamas is a militia that has grown that has risen up out of the ashes of the world's largest open-air prison, okay? That is what Hamas is. Hamas could not even be really accurately defined as a military, let alone comparable to like a state apparatus that is capable of carrying out a mass genocide of the Israeli people. That is not something that is even remotely on the horizon right now. It's not possible. Hamas is not going to invade and take over all of Israel. They're not going to be able to set up like death camps or something like that and massacre the Israeli people. That is not something that's even remotely on the horizon. So we have to put these things in context. We have to understand what Hamas is, the origins of Hamas, the capabilities of Hamas, the intentions of Hamas, the political goals of Hamas, and then compare that to what Israel is doing. And he brought up October 7th there. Of course, there were many atrocities that were committed on October 7th by Hamas. Okay, that's 100% guaranteed. But look at what has happened since then. Okay, not only have we had the insane rhetoric, the bloodthirsty genocidal rhetoric coming from many Israeli politicians, okay, all the way up the ladder to the most powerful people in the Israeli government and military, okay, but we've also seen thousands and thousands of innocent Palestinian people killed, okay? We have seen them bomb all of those different various things that I just mentioned, okay? It's like almost as if they want to pretend as if nothing happened since October 7th, that we haven't seen Israel go in and massacre 10, 15 times the amount of innocent civilians as Hamas did on October 7th. There is no way that you could possibly separate these two forms of violence and pretend as if what Hamas did was evil and that was an atrocity and that was terrorism, but what Israel's doing is perfectly justified and that's okay and that's great. It's self-defense, right? Just completely insane rhetoric there. But again, I'll give you some examples to back that up here in a minute. And now I just want to get to this clip here. So this is again John Feiner, the I guess one of these deputies high up at the NSA, who was also asked a similar question that we've seen guys like Secretary Anthony Blinken ask, where they basically just fudge around and they refuse to actually answer the question of whether or not Israel is actually following in accordance with international law. So let's hear what this guy has to say.
Said today that Israel's actions at Al-Shifa Hospital are a, quote, crime. Does the White House stand by Israel's assessment that Hamas is headquartered underneath the hospital? And are you confident that Israel is following international law?
We've been quite clear about our view of Shifa. Shifa is the largest hospital in Gaza. It is the most advanced hospital in Gaza. There are severely ill patients there. There are also a number of civilians who have gathered there to seek refuge during the course of the conflict, and those lives need to be protected. But we've been equally clear that our intelligence, U.S. intelligence information, not just Israeli intelligence information, suggests that Hamas has used Al-Shifa in an unconscionable way as a command and control facility for the planning of terrorist attacks and the execution of terrorist attacks, and continues to do so. That does not, in our view, mean that Israel should conduct airstrikes on the hospital or ground assaults on the hospital. We've been equally clear about that. But Hamas has put these people in severe jeopardy by the way in which it's conducting this war. So this is a microcosm of the real challenge associated with this entire conflict, and we've laid out our position. It's the same position I've just articulated.
And are you confident Israel is following international law, John? Just yes or no there.
We are confident that it is our position that it needs to. When we have seen issues that are raised based on incidents on the ground, we raise them privately and directly with the government
John,
of Israel.
let me just, you're saying that Israel
play judge and jury on this question.
Yeah, let me just follow up quickly. You said Israel needs to follow international law. Are you confident they are following international law?
What I can say is it is not our position, certainly my position as a policymaker, to play real-time judge and jury on the question of any particular incident. When we see things that concern us, we raise them. We have done that during the course of this conflict. We will continue to do that. And again, just to restate it, it is our position that all countries, including Israel, including the United States, need to adhere to laws of armed conflict. Hamas, by the way, does not only not hold...
Okay. So again, just completely waffling and dancing around the actual question there. And, I do think that that's an improvement on the questioning of some of these guys here from whoever this journalist was on Meet the Press. But really, honestly, in my opinion at least, the job of a journalist isn't just to ask them like what their position what their position on this is. It's to point out what's actually happening on the ground. It is a verifiable 100% indisputable fact that Israel is not following in accordance with international law. They weren't following in accordance with international law even before this recent offensive into Gaza. But just right from the outset, cutting off fuel, water, electricity, internet, all of those things, that mass collective punishment of the Palestinians in Gaza, that in and of itself is against international law. Again, the bombing of mosques in schools and hospitals and all of the rest of that, that is against international law. The targeting of journalists, that is against international law. The targeting of healthcare workers, that is against international law. Indiscriminate bombing of innocent men, women, and children, that is against international law. This is not in the air. This is not up, this is not a question anymore. This is a verifiable fact. So I think getting him to actually answer that question of how he possibly could sit back and say, well, I'm not going to be the judge, jury, and executioner, or the decider of whether or not they're following international law. I mean, it's giving him almost like an out there. And again, these are some of the same guys. Even Joe Biden himself, when Russia invaded Ukraine, okay, and they began their indiscriminate bombing campaign and they killed civilians as a part of their invasion of Ukraine, they all were completely not hesitant at all in any way, shape, or form to come out and say Putin is a war criminal, right? They're engaging in collective punishment. They're attacking civilian infrastructure. They're killing innocent men, women, and children, right? He's committing war crimes. Joe Biden said that himself. Anthony Blinken said that. All of these people said that. They had no hesitation whatsoever. But now when it's one of our allies doing it, oh, now we pretend to be like above the fray. Oh, well, who could really say whether or not they're following international law? Well, we hope they are. And we're sending them, private correspondence behind the scenes to tell them, please don't kill innocent children so much. I mean, like, it's a complete fucking disgusting joke at this point, right? And it's such a, it's almost in a good way like a comparison here that we have, because of how recent the Russian invasion of Ukraine is, because we all have these motherfuckers on the record. Okay, we have all of these Biden administration officials on the record saying what Putin is doing is war crimes. That's collective punishment. That's illegal. He's a criminal. And then we have the comparison here to what they're saying in moments like this. And keep in mind, what Israel has done in Gaza in such a short period of time, at this speed and at this scale of destruction and death, it's not even comparable to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What Israel's doing in Gaza is far worse. It's not comparable. Okay, I brought up the numbers in one of my recent videos of just the children who have been killed in each of these conflicts, right? So Russia invaded Ukraine back in February. It was February 24th, I believe, of 2022. That's when they invaded Ukraine. So we're coming up on like almost 2 years on that relatively by next February. Okay, so like a year and a half. Let's estimate it down to that. And in that year and a half, they've killed roughly 500 or so children in Ukraine, which is an atrocity. That's horrific, obviously. But that's a year and a half of conflict. 500 children that were killed. Israel has already killed, according to the latest estimates that I've seen, at least, at the bare minimum, over 5,000 children. Okay, so infinitely more than the amount that Russia has killed in Ukraine, and in a much more condensed timescale. So the idea that, okay, we're going to call Putin a war criminal, which I think he is, and then you're going to turn around and you're going to say what Israel is doing is in self-defense. I mean, it's just like it rips the mask off of any sort of pretense that the U.S. government has an actual principled stance against war crimes, okay, or against these kinds of, brutal atrocities around the world. It's not. If you're our enemy, we'll call it one thing. If you're our friend, we'll call it a different thing, and we'll continue to give you the weapons to commit those atrocities. I mean, that's what the actual reality is on the ground. And so now I want to show you guys a couple more things. Again, here are the latest casualty estimates here from Euromed Monitor. 17,000 killed of them, and this is a higher estimate than even the one that I just said. I'm giving you a lowball estimate on the 5,000 children. They say over 7,200 children have been killed so far. They say of the 17,000 that have been killed in total, 15,500 of them roughly have been civilians. So we're talking about a ratio of like 15,500 civilians killed to 2 Hamas killed, is basically what they're saying here. 33,000 injuries, 60 murdered journalists, 1.7 million people displaced, 56,000 units completely destroyed, and many more partially destroyed. Damaged press headquarters, 135, 253 damaged schools, 954 damaged industrial facilities, 80 damaged mosques, 3 damaged churches, 442 targeted health staff, and over 100 targeted health facilities. So that's the reality of what's going on the ground. And they have the audacity to come out and say, well, we don't know if they're following in accordance with international law. We hope that they are. We think that they are. We're pressuring them behind the scenes, not in public. Certainly, we would never dare to use public pressure to try to get them to follow international law. No. We're just going to pass it along in like secret messages, like we're handing them a note like you did in class or something to your crush. We also have this. It's pointed out here by Adam Johnson and the Jerusalem Post. North Gaza is now, according to The Economist, uninhabitable for years, and Israel is now focusing its bombing and invasion on South Gaza, which presumably will also be left uninhabitable. When Gaza is made entirely uninhabitable, resettlement cannot, by definition, be voluntary. And this is in response to this article from the Jerusalem Post about voluntary resettlement of the Palestinians in Gaza. And I'm going to circle back around here towards the end of the video on some of the resettlement plans, or some of the plans for after this war in Gaza for the Palestinians who lived there. And it's, believe it or not, completely fucking insane. But I mean, think about this aspect of this offensive as well, right? Because there's a lot of talk about like what's going to happen after this war, after Israel is done bombing Gaza into oblivion. And I mentioned this before. I mean, there's basically nothing to return to in the northern strip of Gaza. I mean, you can look at maps at where Israel has targeted, okay, and they'll highlight it like you have a white map of the north of Gaza, and it'll show you the city center of Gaza City and all of that. And then in red or in orange, they'll show you which, areas have been targeted by Israel. And the entire map at this point in the northern strip of Gaza is red and orange, okay? There's nowhere that is safe. There's nowhere that has been left untouched. So the idea that like, oh, we're going to do this quick military operation, we're going to displace Hamas from power, and then everybody will be able to return back to their homes. There's nothing to return to. You guys have destroyed the hospitals. You've destroyed the infrastructure. You've destroyed their homes. You've destroyed their schools. You've destroyed everything. There's nothing to even return to at this point. If that's not an ethnic cleansing, if this is not genocidal intent, then those words have absolutely no meaning. We also had this. It's pointed out here by Jeremy Scahill. The head of the Aide organization that runs the Indonesian hospital in Gaza, now under sustained assault by Israeli forces, wrote a letter to President Biden that included the phrase, "You have destroyed the international rules of the game, insulted the authority of the UN, torn apart the sense of justice, and hurt human values and tarnished the face of human civilization." So, I mean, this is another aspect of this in terms of like the global perspective on the United States. Not that it was great before this, to say the least, right? I think we obliterated a lot of that good standing maybe that we had in some parts of the world during the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan and all of that shit show. But I mean, this really just rips the mask off of it. Again, especially after all of this moral high ground positioning that we did during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, right? Pretending that we really care about freedom and democracy and peace and stability and, all of that good stuff. And then we turn around and when our ally is committing these atrocities, we say absolutely nothing. Not only do we say absolutely nothing, we justify it. We give them diplomatic cover. We protect them at the United Nations and prevent any sort of resolutions passing that would force them to follow international law, right? We continue giving them the weapons, the bombs that are dropping on the heads of Palestinian children. That's what we decided to do. And so again, I mean, this idea that like all of these countries around the world, especially countries that are post-colonial or that have been fucked over by the West over the last number of decades, like people are looking at this, right? People all around the world. It's not just in the Middle East, everywhere around the world. They're looking at the United States, and even domestically here in the US, so many young people are having this like awakening right now and coming to realize like, oh shit, I didn't realize that this kind of a thing could even happen, right? I didn't realize that like our government will go and support a complete ethnic cleansing and mass war crimes being committed with our dollars, with our weapons. And so I think a lot of people around the world are seeing this and they're taking notice of it. But I want to circle back here around to, again, John Kirby's statement here at the beginning, saying Hamas, the inferior power that's not even comparable to the military power of Israel right now, they're the ones who are committing a genocide or want to commit a genocide. Israel would never commit a genocide, or they would never have the intention to commit a genocide. Let's just review a couple things recently. So this was a couple of days ago. Video shows dozens of bodies after alleged attack at a UN-run school in Gaza. No fucking idea in the world why they decided to use the word alleged attack. The attack happened. We saw it. We saw the videos of it. We saw the dead children all around this UN school that was being used in Gaza. And this was a place where not only people were, using it in the typical sense that you would use it if there wasn't this offensive going on, but people were taking shelter there. The thousands of people were taking shelter at this school. And Israel bombed it. They bombed it into oblivion, right? We also had this recently in terms of the rhetoric. Israel's finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, who's one of these insane, fascists within the Israeli government right now. And he agreed with this completely bloodthirsty and insane and genocidal letter here that I'm going to read you a portion of in a second. Okay? And he tweeted this out. He said, "I agree with every word of this letter in this column." This is Bezalel Smotrich. This is the Israeli finance minister who has great sway in the Benjamin Netanyahu government. And just as a reminder, in case you have difficulty believing me when I characterize him as a fascist, this was his characterization of himself. He says he's a fascist homophobe, but he won't stone gays. Okay, so I guess he's fine then, right? But he called himself a fascist homophobe, all right? And so he says, "I agree with every word of this letter." Here's the translation of the letter. So I'll link this down below if you want to go read the entirety of it. But I want to focus on something down here at the bottom. The way to win the war faster and at a lower cost for us, meaning Israelis, requires a system collapse on the other side, and not the mere killing of more Hamas fighters, so implying the killing of civilians. The international community warns us of a humanitarian disaster in Gaza and of severe epidemics. We must not shy away from this, as difficult as that may be. After all, severe epidemics in the south of the Gaza Strip will bring victory closer and reduce casualties amongst IDF soldiers. And no, it's not about cruelty for cruelty's sake, since we don't support the suffering as a goal, but as a means to a goal. Okay? They also set up here, I mean, like, the presentation that there are such innocents in Gaza is inaccurate. And he says, since who are the poor women of Gaza? They are all mothers, sisters, or wives of Hamas murderers. Okay? So this letter, to put it lightly, basically says there's no such thing as innocent civilians within Gaza. You are one of three things. You're either Hamas, or you're a Hamas sympathizer, and you're aiding and abetting Hamas, or you're a Hamas human shield. Those are the only three categories. There's no such thing as innocent civilians in the mind of these Israelis, right? And then this guy posts a column where he is explicitly saying we should use epidemics, we should use disease and human suffering, okay, and brutality towards the civilian population as a means to fight Hamas. That's what he's saying here. And this is one of the most powerful people in the Israeli government who says, I agree with every word of this column. Is that not genocidal intent? Okay, and keep in mind, the guy who wrote that column, he wasn't just some nobody. This was the author. He's a retired major general of the IDF and a former head of the Israeli National Security Council. We also had this clip, and I'm not going to play it here, but the gist of it is laid out here in his own statement. Elon Levy, who is an Israeli government spokesman, he said, the World Health Organization is complicit with Hamas's human shield strategy and any loss of life from its gross negligence. So I've seen this echoed before. It's getting to a comical point at this point, right? Israel and their spokespeople and their military and their politicians literally think that everybody is Hamas. Okay? You work for the UN, you're Hamas. You work for the World Health Organization, you are Hamas. You're a teacher, you're Hamas. You are, an imam, you're Hamas. You are a priest, you're Hamas. Anything, every single person, every facility under the sun is Hamas. That is their characterization here. To the point where they are literally talking directly to the World Health Organization and saying, you're complicit. You guys are just being human shields. You're trying to cover up Hamas bases and weapons and all of that. I mean, it is delusional. It is so beyond ridiculous at this point. Here we have another thing. Israel's Minister of Communications calls on the IDF, okay, warning this is disgusting here, but this is the Minister of Communications. He posted this himself, okay, calls on the IDF to cut off the foreskins of Hamas fighters as revenge, and as David did with the Philistines, okay? This is a real verified account here. That's what they're saying. Netanyahu references violent biblical passages, which is raising alarms amongst people. This is referring to the Amalek quote that he used, where he was referring to a biblical passage in which they go and they smite Amalek, right? And they say, you kill every single person under the sun, right? Men, women, children, oxes, sheep, cattle, everything. Wipe it all out. And he used that in a speech in front of the fucking world. And then people have a question. Oh, well, what do they mean? Oh, they're engaging in self-defense. Oh, they don't have genocidal intent. You would have to completely ignore everything that all of these Israeli politicians have said in order to believe that they do not have the intention of wiping Palestinians off the map. Okay? Again, Israeli minister admits military is carrying out, quote, a Nakba against Gaza's Palestinians. Okay? This was an Israeli minister who came out and he openly said, we are rolling out Gaza Nakba 2023, referring to the Nakba in 1948, where over 700,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from their land. This is their language. This isn't my language. I'm not putting together a puzzle here that's super complicated and difficult to understand. You don't have to do much digging. They're just openly saying it. We had this. Again, this was one of the plans that they had for after this invasion of Gaza. One creative solution being floated is the construction of a huge artificial island off the coast of Gaza. Quote, it will be cheaper and faster than rebuilding the Gaza Strip itself, a very senior former security official told Al Monitor, seeking to promote his brainchild. This is his idea. He's bragging about it. There is technology, means, and money. Abu Dhabi and Dubai have huge numbers of such artificial islands, which have become hubs of tourism, commerce, housing, and infrastructure. It's relatively easy, it's cheap, and it will allow everyone to turn over a new leaf. The Gazans will receive new land with efficient infrastructure. This is seriously something that is being floated. We're going to expel them from Gaza and put them on a man-made island, I guess in the Mediterranean Sea. This is what's being floated at some of the highest levels. Senior Israeli intelligence official. And I want to make this point clear as well. It's not just the fact that we have the most far-right government in Israel's history right now in power, with Benjamin Netanyahu and Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir and the rest of these motherfuckers. This is the opposition leader here, Yair Lapid. Okay, this is a guy who Ben Shapiro recently characterized as being sort of like the Israeli left, right? Here's what he had to say. The majority of the 12,000 dead Palestinians were terrorists. That's what he had to say. So, as we have seen the numbers that I showed you guys earlier, now it's over 17,000. He says the majority of the 12,000 dead Palestinians were terrorists. And as pointed out here by Trita Parsi, already like half of them, 40% on the low end estimate, are children. So either you think that all of the children who have been massacred so far are all terrorists, they're all Hamas, even though they're fucking children, or you believe that literally every single other person outside of the children who have been killed are like Hamas militants, which is also just obviously not true. So this is like the opposite. This is supposed to be the more reasonable, like centrist or center-left alternative to Benjamin Netanyahu. And even he is coming out and just denying the reality that they have massacred this amount of innocent men, women, and children. And again, what I referenced earlier here, the map of the new Middle East. I mean, don't take my word for it. Look at the map. You got Egypt, you got Jordan, you got Syria up here, you got Lebanon there, Cyprus, you got Saudi Arabia, all of these, Iraq. And then here's Israel. Do you guys see Gaza on the map? Do you guys see the West Bank on this map? No, because it's not there. And that's what Benjamin Netanyahu called the new Middle East. So, again, when we use the language of genocide or ethnic cleansing, I don't use it lightly. I'm not using it just as like a hyperbolic attack or something. We've read the definition of what the word genocide means under international law. We have looked at the actions of the government of Israel and what they are doing in Gaza and the West Bank. We have looked at the statements from the highest level Israeli politicians and military leaders. If what they are doing right now, and if their openly stated intentions of what they want to do in Gaza does not constitute genocide or genocidal intent, then the word, in my opinion at least, has basically no meaning. So the idea that we have a U.S. government that is refusing to say that they are even violating international law, let alone that, they are trying to conduct a mass ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, it's completely detached from reality. You have to be completely dishonest. You have to, again, completely ignore everything that they have said since October 7th and even before October 7th in order to believe that what they are doing is some form of self-defense.